So the first slate of 11th edition has dropped, and oh my god, it is looking great for Dark Angels. Well, the first slate has arrived, and it has been massive in terms of change. Everything we thought we knew about 11th edition has already been thrown on its head and turned into something completely different. For Dark Angels, though, that's been a really positive thing. It almost feels like all of our dreams were answered in one single slate. There's still a few frustrating things about this particular slate and about 11th edition in general, but overall, I think this is shaping up to be one of the most positive spaces that we've seen Warhammer in for a very long time. So let's leap straight into it and talk about some of those big changes that have happened. Now, probably the most impactful across the entirety of the 40k spectrum is that dispositions in many armies changed. Now, one of the big ones was Purge for 1 DP has been changed basically across the board. If you had a bolt-on detachment that was Purge, it probably doesn't exist anymore, which is quite a big change because we were seeing consistently high play for Purge the Foe as a disposition across the singles network. A lot of people were shoehorning it into lists and just focusing on killing, which personally I wasn't a huge fan of. I didn't think that it was actually that strong, but equally I think a lot of people did, and a lot of people argued that it was just one that they just had to focus on killing, so that's what they did. Instead, personally, I prefer sort of a bit of recon, bit of take and hold. So I think that this change is actually really good for us, giving people more access to take and hold, especially now that the Dark Angels 1 DP detachment, the Chaplain detachment, has changed from Purge the Foe to take and hold, which gives us access to that very critical disposition, which I think Dark Angels really thrive upon. Unfortunately, it is with our worst 1 DP detachment, but it's a good start, and it shows that Games Workshop are willing to change, adapt, and give people the things that they need to make sure their faction flourishes. Dark Angels have actually come out of the slate fantastically well. We have had multiple rules changes. We had quite a few points hikes, so things like the Dark Angels land speed of vengeance going up 10 points. However, they made sense. A lot of our data sheets got stronger, and particularly something related to Company of Hunters, which we are going to come on to later, and why it might well be the most cracked detachment available in the game, not just Space Marines, right now. So we know that Space Marines have been doing well for quite a while. We've seen a lot of Librarius. We've seen Dark Angels take down a Super Major. We've seen myself go 5-0 with Salamanders at another Super Major. Marines have been in a really solid spot. And yes, in many ways, Librarius did take a bit of a knock. However, they are still very much in a strong space. And I think that the changes to Dark Angels have only improved them more, and it's going to be a really good time to be playing more Dark Angels. Equally, I think we're going to have a lot of people thinking about how to counter us a lot more, but overall, if you are playing on your tabletop, you will be smashing more opponents by playing Dark Angels. Now, one of the things that I have been doing since the start of 11th edition is moaning about how rubbish the Lion is. Now, I truly believe that Games Workshop have at least tried to address the problem, and we've seen some good changes. First of all, the Lion has gone down from his pity 285 points to a paltry 265. He has only 15 points more than a Land Raider Redeemer, and I would say that that is pretty solid in terms of what you're getting with this absolutely brutal melee profile and a 3-up invulnerable save. I think that that is going to push the Lion up to that competitive play level again. Obviously, I would prefer it if he felt a little bit more impactful. There have been some changes around his Primarch abilities, which are a little bit confusing, of you pick in your command phase, but at the end of your opponent's phase, you can pick the Lion up. So that felt like a bit of a miss, in all honesty, with his forest walking, although I have heard some people talking about how you can declare it while he's in reserve and then ingress him turn 1, which is interesting, but also not sure that that's overly useful. But he is very powerful just with that defensive body for that 265 points. He's not taking a big chunk of your army up like he was when he was, say, 315 points. You can get a lot in with your Dark Angels still, because now at this cost, he's pretty damn low and he's still strong. Something that I've been quite impressed with as well is that Fights First may have been neutered, But there was a big change to heroic intervention, allowing that unit to gain fights first. So if you have one unit with fights first and one reliable heroic intervention target, then you will always be able to interrupt your opponent for free somewhere. And that's massively beneficial to kind of make sure that you're dictating that pace of the combat and forcing your opponent to make those critical decisions that they might make an error with. And that is ultimately what we're always trying to push these kind of fast, aggressive combat pressure armies to do. We just need them to make one mistake, we stamp on it, kill some resources in their turn, and then roll over them. That is the simplest way to deal with some of these particular pressure-focused, particularly melee armies. Now, I think that the Lion has some real potential here. I'm overall really impressed with his 4-up Feel No Pain to Mortal Wounds aura. I think that's become a lot more valuable in 11th edition, and the reroll aura is something that I really have felt like I've missed. Obviously, Dark Angel's melee has become considerably worse because we are slower, and the change to not ingressing, but the change, well, technically, yes, the change to ingressing, but more so the change to charge rules have made things slightly worse for things like Deathwing Knights and the Lion, because they are slow melee. However, there are some things that have picked that up with this slate, particularly when it comes to Company of Hunters. So we should probably jump into that. Don't worry, I'm not going to keep you waiting any longer for the Company of Hunters content. Now, you might be going, if you've watched me before, Toby, you did Company of Hunters as your first 11th edition list because, you know, fast gun good. And yes, I did. But then for some reason, Company of Hunters got significantly better. The two worst stratagems, worst, obviously it's subjective, but Death on the Wind was never really one that was overly good. Battle Shock at -1 is cute, but it's not doing a huge amount. And then the other one, which I can't even remember off the top of my head, I think it was like Lance into infantry characters. They are gone, and they have been replaced with flat Lance for anyone and advance and charge for anyone. So those two critical things that Company of Hunters was lacking, of being able to support Deathwing Knights or the Lion, alongside that ability to give Lance, which pushes the Lion and pushes Deathwing Knights and other combat threats like Sammael to that next level. It's genuinely one of the strongest changes I've ever seen. I was shocked when I saw that change come in because it felt like all of my prayers have been answered. I've literally written a video about how to make the Lion great again, and it was give him access to advance and charge and give him access to Lance alongside a small points drop. And I will never get to release that video now because Games Workshop kind of beat me to the punch in terms of releasing those changes to the rules, which is really great. And I'm really impressed to see that the Lion has that clout alongside the strongest detachments available to us. Now, the nice thing about Company of Hunters is it is 2 detachment points. Whether it stays that for very long, I would question. I don't think it will. I think it will go the same way as things like Green Tide, all that kind of thing, and go to 3 detachment points because it gives you access to so many powerful rules. But at this point in time, we can combo it with some seriously strong detachments, and particularly detachments that we want the disposition of. So Librarius and Darkflight are probably the 2 best examples, but you can also use the Plasma detachment to get access to priority assets. There's so many good options here. I think personally you want to be looking at Recon with this particular list. I think that's very, very strong, but overall being 2 detachment points, especially when it kind of has a bit of a rubbish disposition at the moment in terms of disruption, we're seeing some really good stuff come through with the combos that you can pull off. Now, obviously, you can see that I've got the Land Speed of Vengeance on screen, and that is something that, in all honesty, is just built for Company of Hunters, but it lacks that little bit of reliability in 11th edition because obviously it's hazardous, takes 3 mortal wounds on a 1 and a 2, which is pretty rough for a 10 wound vehicle, and it's only D6 plus 1 shots. However, with Darkflight, obviously we can put on these battery enhancement, which allows us to reroll hazardous and reroll our number of shots, and that makes these little guys so much more consistent. Now, they did go up those 10 points, but overall, I am really impressed with the potential output that they can bring. Overall, I think Company of Hunters is probably the best attachment available to Dark Angels, possibly available to Space Marines, and even maybe a step further, possibly the entire game. There is really something to this, and I think Company of Hunters gives so many powerful rules that we need in 11th edition across the board. With these two changes, I am thoroughly thrilled to be able to put Company of Hunters on the table and play as much good, high-quality Dark Angels as possible. Now, something that was really spicy as well that came out of the slate was a change to Sammael. He has joined the other mounted characters, particularly the named ones, in allowing their units to gain the mobile keyword, which critically allows them to move through terrain features, thus making it a lot easier to get around the board, because it was a little bit more of a pain in the backside to stage yourself and then go through these different terrain features, but now we don't need to worry about that, and I'm very impressed with the outcome of this. With the Ravenwing Command Squad also moving to the support keyword, this now allows us to combo Sammael and the Ravenwing Command Squad, or a Chaplain and the Ravenwing Command Squad, giving them a massive boost in terms of the potential damage output that a massive unit can do. Potentially, we will now see 10 biker units, which I think is somewhat hilarious. How you will hide that, I think, is an entirely different problem. But overall, it's really fun, really positive, and I like that little change. It wasn't one that I was expecting, but it gives the Ravenwing a bit more of a bite, and critically for the Company of Hunters list that we're thinking about and looking at, it gives them another melee threat, especially with a high amount of speed. This unit honestly can kill basically anything in the game. There's very few units that it won't shift past some of the units that may be able to scam it on 4-up invulnerable saves or things like that. But especially when you combo it with the Lance stratagem and +1 to wound, you are able to take down just about anything. I really like Sammael going up to damage 3. It gives you damage 3 Sammael, it gives you damage 3 Ravenwing Champion, and that works out at 12 damage 3 attacks. Also with Sammael having access to that sustain 2. It really doesn't mince its words when it's going through units. I've been thoroughly impressed with it so far, and I think this unit may be one of the best in the game, especially with the low cost of 270 points to deliver this entire package and then force someone to come and deal with it. It's either 270 or 275 if you take it with Ravenwing Black Knights. Obviously, you can take it with 6 bikes instead. Personally, I think slimming it down is probably enough to still get those results, but overall, this unit is incredible. Now, you can also add enhancements to the Ravenwing Command Squad, which works particularly well with Sammael, with things like maybe Recon Hunter or coming in from reserves. You could give them precision, but I don't think that's overly worth it. But something like Recon Hunter, I think almost feels like a no-brainer with the speed of this unit already, mobile, and then the +1 to their advance, +1 to their charge, and obviously having access to advanced shoot charge. They are disgustingly fast. I actually managed to score outflank turn 1 by having Sammael's unit touch my opponent's back end of the board and having one of my units on my back end of the board, and that scored me outflank, which I thought was a little bit nuts, but also very, very cool. Sammael is now almost like a must-have. At 95 points, he is an absolute bargain. And I love comboing him with those Outriders, with those Ravenwing Command Squad. I think it has the most potential of just bringing this high, fast damage output unit that forces a meaningful response from our opponent. Because even if you only take the 6 bikes and Sammael, that is a tough unit, especially if it starts regenning, all that kind of stuff. If your opponent doesn't devote enough resources to kill it in a turn, especially when you can -1 to hit it if it does have cover, because then it's -2 to hit, which is pretty tasty. Somehow we managed to keep that still. I think this is really solid. And then obviously with Sammael having fly, that opens up other potential combos that you can pull off, particularly with things maybe like Dark Flight. So I have been thoroughly impressed with this unit. And I think that Sammael will now be a staple of most Dark Angel armies. Now, this would usually be the part of the video where I would show you some glorious lists on what I'm thinking of playing, but unfortunately it is the WTC deadline, and I don't fully know when this video is going out, so I'm having to be a little bit cautious on what I am saying at this point, because I need to not put the list that I'm thinking out there, because it may be what I play at WTC. I think overall Dark Angels may well be the best Marine, I'll say that for free, but I can't give away the exact source of what I'm looking to do. Company of Hunters is clearly incredibly strong. I really believe it is, maybe the best detachment in the game. So, is it going to end up being the Marine slot for teams? It's a really good question, because there are a lot of powerful Marines out there. There's Raven Guard, Death Watch, Salamanders still, other versions of Dark Angels as well. There's even more fringe options like Black Templars in the Purge build, or even Space Wolves in the Take and Hold build. It really is horses for courses, but overall I believe we will see a lot more Dark Angels going forward. And just because I couldn't put a list in this video, I did put 3 photos of my new favourite cryptid, Jimothy, the new Seattle icon, because he warms my soul, and I think any proud son of the lion would indeed love Jimothy. Now, if you want to know more about how you can play Company of Hunters and how you can play Dark Angels in this new edition, then you can hit me up for coaching over on tacticalrock40k.co.uk or .com. I can't remember which one it is, but go and hit me up. You can book in some sessions for you. You can book in some long-term training plans as well, and keep an eye out for some of the more packages that we have on the way. I will still be releasing tons more videos, including my road to the WTC and everything that I get up to while I am down in Mechlin. So keep tuned. Make sure you're subscribing so that you can keep part of that. And remember, stay loyal, brothers. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.